All right, so now we're going to be talking about long-term memory. So once the information is received, it enters the sensory memory stage where it's either forgotten within a second or it's transferred to the short-term memory. And there the memory is then kept in an active state through rehearsal until the memory is either forgotten or transferred to the long-term memory stage. Now, there are two types of long-term memory. We have declarative memory and procedural or non-declarative memory. So declarative memory refers to factual information. So this refers to names, faces, dates, facts, and so on. So remembering that your brother's girlfriend's name is Christina, remembering what she looks like and recognizing her in passing at the grocery store. So remembering who the fifth president of the United States is. Remembering things like the dates of world wars, when World War I began and started, or when World War II began and ended, and so on. Now, these types of memories can be relayed to other people. So what that means is that you can essentially communicate this information to other people, right? These facts that you remember. So declarative memory is also often referred to as explicit memory. Now, declarative memory can be divided into two separate categories. So remember that declarative memory is one type of long-term memory, and now declarative memory is going to be split up in sort of two categories. We have semantic memory and episodic memory. Semantic memory refers to general knowledge or facts about your world and the environment around you, and also refers to rules of logic that are used to deduce other facts. So these are things like remembering the zip code for a certain city, remembering the capital of the states, remembering certain math equations, right? So, using facts or rules of logic, to deduce other facts. We do this a lot when we're solving math problems. So it's your general trivia knowledge, essentially. Whereas episodic memory refers to memories of events occurring at a particular time, place, or context. So these episodes or events that happen in your life, things like learning to ride a bike or planning your wedding. The episodic memories relate to the when and how. So you know that coffee is hot and it will burn you. Okay, that's a semantic memory. That's general knowledge about a fact, right? Knowing that, when something's steaming, it's hot, and if it's hot, it's going to burn you. Those are facts, general knowledge facts. But remembering when you learned that, because maybe you were a small child, you grabbed your mom's cup and the coffee spilt and burned you, that's an episodic memory. Okay, so episodic memories are more the when and how you learned something, whereas the semantic memory are the actual facts that you know. Okay, so that's the difference between the two. The second type of long-term memory is procedural or non-declarative memory. So this refers to memories of particular skills or habits. So it's remembering how to ride a bike or how to hit a baseball or how to roller skate, right? And if you think about it, you can still do these things, these sort of actions, even if you haven't done them in a very long time. People use the phrase all the time that says, oh, it's like riding a bike, right? Even if you haven't done it in a long time, you still are able to ride a bike. You may not be able to explain how you balance a bike well enough to ride it, or how you place your feet on the pedals at a certain speed to keep the bike balanced, but you can still engage in the correct action of riding a bike because of procedural memory. Okay, so it's talking about almost like a muscle memory type thing. That's what we're referring to when we refer to procedural memories. It's more of an action rather than describing facts or information. So if we're referring to declarative memory, that's referring to information about things, facts, whereas procedural memory is referring to how to do things, the procedure of actually behaving or engaging in that skill. Now, according to some memory researchers, we're able to recall detailed information from long-term memory because of the associations we build between different pieces of information. So, from this viewpoint, our knowledge or the information that's stored is stored in semantic networks. So, these are sort of mental representations or clusters of interconnected information. We have associations between different types of memories. So when one memory is activated, it actually triggers activation of other memories. And this process of one memory triggering another memory that triggers another memory and so on is called spreading activation. And it comes from this idea that these mental representations of information that we have stored are actually all interconnected in these semantic networks. So here's an example of this process of spreading activation. So for example, let's say you hear the word red. Okay, now red is a color. So the word red is going to activate a memory that red is a color, right? And then it might activate another memory of words associated with the color red, like roses, fire engine, cherries. And then the word cherry is going to activate a memory that results in different type of fruits, right? Associated with other fruits. So pears, apples, bananas. And then you activate a memory that, well, what color is the banana? The color is yellow. Yellow is also a color just like red, right? So you can see how even just one word, all of these associations were activated by that word red. And all of the different types of memories that are associated with that word are also activated. So that's how sort of semantic networks work. Now, one of the major challenges for psychologists and neuroscientists who are interested in studying memory is trying to pinpoint a location in the brain, or at least a part of the brain, where long term memories are held. So the question is, is there one specific area where memories are held, or are memories distributed across different areas of the brain? They're looking for something called what they call an engram, which is a physical memory trace in the brain that corresponds to a specific memory, right? So a specific spot in the brain that's going to correspond, like that part of the brain is activated when a specific memory is recalled. Now, this hasn't been located yet, but with the use of current brain scanning techniques, so things like MRIs or fMRIs, researchers have at least been able to locate certain areas of the brain that specialize in different types of memories. So perhaps not specific memories themselves, but the general category of different types of memories. They have located certain areas of the brain that take place with those memories. So, for example, the hippocampus has been found to help with the initial coding of incoming information. So, information that you receive, and then coding that and sort of categorizing it. The hippocampus has been found to be very active when you are receiving incoming information. And they believe it plays a role in consolidating that information from short term to long term memory. So, taking those memories or that information from the long term to storing it, or from the short term, excuse me, from the short term memory and then storing it in the long term memory. Additionally, the amygdala has been found to be involved in memories that involve emotion. So, for example, in my experience, I'm scared of the ocean because of a traumatic experience I had when I was very young. And now I am very likely to remember that event pretty vividly, which is related to the functioning of the amygdala when that event occurred. So then later, when I'm back at the ocean again, it reactivates my amygdala, and the experience of that unpleasant feeling from that past experience sort of comes up again, okay, because the amygdala is activated again. And if you recall, the amygdala is associated with the fear response, right? And the fight or flight response. So you can see how traumatic experiences are also linked to the amygdala and can be um, um, can have an effect when you're recalling traumatic memories. So it's clear that the hippocampus and the amygdala do play a large role in the formation of memory. But how is that information actually transferred to a memory at the level of neurons? So there's a process called long-term potential, and this shows that certain neural pathways become easily excited when a new response is being learned. Okay, so you're learning a new response or new information is coming in. These neural pathways become excitatory, and the memories are then stored. So, memories of this information, this incoming information, are then stored and retained because of the strengthening of these neural connections in the brain. Okay, so information comes in, those neural connections are excited, they're working, they're activated, and then those memories are stored because of the strength that comes from all of those active neural connections that are happening in the brain. Now, at the same time, the number of synapses between neurons, so remember the synapse is the space between each neuron where information is passed from one neuron to the next. Um, the number of synapses between those neurons actually increase. And the dendrites branch out to receive these messages. So again, recall when we talked about what a neuron looks like. The dendrites are those sort of spiny, almost tree-looking branches that are on the end, the start end of the neuron. And they receive incoming sensory information. They bring it into the body of the neuron, and then the message is passed down the axon, right? So these changes reflect a process called consolidations, where memories become fixed and stable in the long-term memory. And it's from these neural pathways becoming excited, becoming activated when these new responses are learned, like I said before. Okay. Now, long-term memories do take some time to stabilize, which does explain why events and other stimuli are not suddenly fixed in your memory, right? It does take some time for this to happen. Consolidation, like I said before, where memories do become fixed, so they go from the short term to the long term memory, it can continue on for days or even years. It's not instant that these memories are transferred to the long term memory. We talked about earlier in the lecture about different rehearsal techniques, right? So it takes time for you to go over that information before they're actually committed to your long term memory. Now, the capacity of your long term memory, so how much information it can actually hold, is vast, right? It's huge. There's so much information that is stored in your memory, especially in your long term memory. So, how are we able to sort through all of this stored material and then recall the correct information when we actually need it, right? So, one way we're able to do this is through something called retrieval cues. So, these are stimuli or stimulus that allows you to recall information from your long term memory more easily or quickly. And these cues can be anything like a word, an emotion, a specific sound, a smell, a place, right? The possibilities are almost endless. But again, it's basically a stimulus that has been paired with the information. And then when you come into contact with that stimulus again, it makes it easier for you to recall the information that was paired with it. So here's an example. Let's say I'm out at the grocery store, and this has happened to me many times. So my husband works for a grocery store. He is actually the adult beverage manager. So basically, he um, is working with all of the wine and beer and alcohol distributors in the state of California, and with different wineries and different breweries and so on. To bring in, different alcohol to the store, to his department. And so we go to a lot of wine events and beer garden events, not anymore because of COVID, but we used to go to all of these really fun food and wine events, and I would meet all of the different distributors that he works with. So I'm walking through a grocery store. So here's an example. That was just sort of the background of this, but I'm walking through a grocery store, and not the one my husband works at, a different one. And someone walks up to me and says, "Oh, hi, Shannon." They call out and say hi, and they're waving to me and walking towards me down the aisle. Now I'm looking at this woman. It was a woman when this happened, and I really had no idea who she was. I knew that I knew her, but I didn't know her name. I didn't know where I knew her from. It was sort of one of those moments where it's like, your face looks familiar, but I don't know who you are, right? So I politely say hello back and sort of give a little wave. And as she's getting closer, she sort of probably realizes that I look slightly confused. And so she says, "Oh, I'm Christine. I work with your husband. I met you at the last wine event that we hosted, that my winery hosted." So this cue of where we met, so the context we met in, which was a wine event, how I know her, she's a wine distributor, she works with my husband. Those cues help me to remember her from the actual event. Now I remember actually meeting her. I remember that her name's Christine. Um, it gives me some context, right? And I'm able to recall who she is, and have a conversation with her. So seeing Christine in the supermarket, a grocery store that I also don't normally shop at, right? My husband wasn't there, so he wasn't even there as a cue. He would also be another cue, right? If she came up to say hello to me and my husband was with her, that's another cue, right? That he works with her, and that's how I know her. But in a new supermarket where I've never seen her before and I don't usually shop, it's a different context from where I originally met her. It makes it much more difficult for me to remember who she is, especially when I don't know her that well, right? I had only met her once or twice at that point. Whereas if I had met her again at the same or similar event, a wine event, or like I said, if my husband was with her, or perhaps if it was at my husband's store, that would serve as a retrieval cue, the context, right? And I would be able to recall her name more easily. So retrieval cues are that. They're anything that would be paired with the memory and make it easier for you to recall information. Now, when we're retrieving information, it may be either to recall information or recognize material you've seen before, okay, that has been stored in your memory. So, recognition is when you're presented with a particular stimulus and then asked if you've seen it before, right? Or you're shown a list of perhaps, the information and then a bunch of other information, and you're asked to identify the correct one. So this probably sounds familiar. This is what you're doing when you take a multiple choice exam, right? You're presented with information you've seen before, and you're asked to recognize or select it from the other information, the incorrect information, right? So that's the kind of memory that you're calling on when you're taking multiple choice exams. Now, recall, on the other hand, so we have recognition and then we have recall. This refers to a specific piece of memory or information that must be retrieved. And this is what you're doing when you are answering fill in the blank answers or essay questions. So this is different from recognition, because with recognition, you're actually shown the information and you have to identify if you've seen it before, right? Or identify if it's correct compared to the ones that you're seeing. So you're actually seeing the information and you have to select it. Whereas in recall, you just have to remember that information. You have to retrieve it from your memory, right? So if this is fill in the blank, the answer is not there. There's not choices for an answer. You have to retrieve that information. Same with essay questions, or trying to recall someone's name, right? If someone's walking up to you and you might recognize their face, right? So that's recognition. You know that you've been exposed to this information before. You know you've met them before, but you can't recall their name. That was what was happening to me in my previous example, right? I vaguely remember that I had met her, but I couldn't recall who she was. So recognition is generally easier than recall, and probably, if you would guess, right? Because if you think about it, let's say if you've seen someone you know, again, you're more likely to recognize them without any trouble. You probably can think of many instances where you see someone and you're like, oh, I know them from somewhere. But recalling their actual name is much more difficult. So recognition is a little bit easier than recall.